In this chapter, we will trace the history of this enduring medium and examine its impact on our lives today by learning the early history of books, including the invention of papyrus and the printing press, and the start of the publishing industry in colonial America, and examining the evolution of modern publishing and trends in book publishing and consumption in the digital age. While books existed as the only mass medium for hundreds of years, critics have claimed the introduction of each emerging mass medium would destroy the industry. Why would people read a book, for example, when they could watch a movie or TV program, listen to the radio, or browse social media? Not only did book publishing survive each new major technological advance, but the number of books published has risen over time, and most steeply since the internet became commercially available. But let's back up to the early history of books. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese, and Romans all produced innovations that led up to what we think of today as a book. This included the Egyptian use of papyrus as far back as 2400 before Common Era. Made of plants from along the Nile River, the material was turned into scrolls that could be written upon. Papyrus was gradually replaced by parchment, treated animal skin that was stronger, smoother, more durable, and less expensive. The 12th century Quran was one of many books printed on parchment and made as a codex. The first proto-modern book was thought to be produced by the Romans in the 4th century. Called a codex, it was sheets of parchment sewn together along one edge, bound with thin pieces of wood, and covered with leather. While the scroll needed to be rolled and unrolled to be read, a codex could be opened to any page, like a modern book. The manuscript brought books from development into the entrepreneurial stage of media development. During the European Middle Ages of 400 to 1500 Common Era, Christian priests and monks transcribed religious texts, particularly the Bible. These illuminated manuscripts featured decorative and colorful illustrations. But keep in mind, each text had to be copied by hand, so it was a long and painstaking process. Across the world, Chinese printers developed block printing as early as the 3rd century. Using this technique, printers applied sheets of paper to large blocks of inked wood, into which they had hand-carved a page's worth of characters and illustrations. The oldest dated block-printed book still in existence is China's Diamond Sutra, a collection of Buddhist scriptures printed in 868. Another major improvement came with the Chinese invention of movable type around the year 1000. Rather than carving each new page on a block, printers carved commonly used combinations of characters from the Chinese language into smaller, reusable wood and later ceramic blocks. They then arranged the pieces needed to represent a desired page of text, inked the small blocks, and applied the sheets to paper. This method enabled them to create pages of text much more quickly than before. While the Chinese made incredible advancement to decrease the time it took to create a page of text, it was Johannes Gutenberg's invention of the printing press that propelled books into the mass media stage of development. This so-called first modern book, the Gutenberg Bible, was printed on a fine calfskin-based parchment called vellum. As printing presses spread across Europe in the late 1400s and early 1500s, so did the knowledge that books brought. Rather than rely on the words of political or religious leaders, people learned to read and think for themselves and began challenging the traditional wisdom and customs of their tribes and leaders. Naturally, the increasing number of books printed resulted in the formation of printing shops across Europe to sell them. As Europeans immigrated to the colonies, they brought their desire to read with them, and the first colonial print shop was set up in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the late 1630s. By the mid-1760s, all 13 colonies had print shops, with one of the best-known publishers being Benjamin Franklin. Demand for books continued to increase in the 1800s, and American publishers needed to keep up. Paper was now being made by machines rather than handmade. Cloth book covers were favored over leather ones, and paperback books were being made with cheaper paper covers. As books cost less to produce, they could be sold for less and still make a profit. This led to the introduction of dime novels. Paperbacks sold for 5 or 10 cents apiece. By 1885, 1/3 of all books were popular paperbacks, called pulp fiction, in reference to the cheap machine-made pulp paper they were printed on. As the types of books were changing, so was how they were being printed. In the 1880s, a linotype machine enabled printers to save time by setting type mechanically with a typewriter-style keyboard instead of by hand. The development of offset lithography a few decades later allowed publishers to print books from photographic plates instead of metal casts, greatly reducing the cost of color illustrations and allowing books to print faster. As literacy continued to increase in America, so did the demand for books. The 1800s saw the development of publishing houses, companies that identified and produced the works of respected writers. Some of the oldest publishing houses are names you may recognize: Harper & Brothers, which became HarperCollins, Little Brown, Houghton Mifflin, and Macmillan, the publisher of your course textbook. Book publishing declined in the 1910s through the 1940s as a result of American involvement in 2 world wars and the Great Depression in between them. But as the U.S. economy recovered in the 1950s and 60s, so did the book industry. While you may hear the term book and envision a popular paperback, the book industry is comprised of several book types. The first is that popular paperback, called as its hardcover version, a trade book. These are aimed at general readers and include the adult trade, juvenile trade, and comics and graphic novels. Adult just means books marketed to non-juvenile readers. The term is a catch-all to encompass fiction and nonfiction, biographies, literary classics, self-help books, cookbooks, etc. The juvenile trade category ranges from preschool picture books to young reader to young adult, The Cat in the Hat to Junie B. Jones to Harry Potter. The last category of trade books is comic and graphic novels, which comprise 6% of the U.S. book market in 2018. Not surprisingly, textbooks also make up a chunk of the book market. Textbook markets are generally divided into elementary through high school, college, and vocational texts. Professional books are more technical books, targeted specific occupations like law, medicine, business, and technology, instead of the general public. Reference books encompass dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases, almanacs, legal case books, and medical manuals. While dictionaries and encyclopedias previously held the largest share of this market, free online versions have severely diminished the market for hard copies. Our next type is religious books, a category that features the best-selling book of all time, the Christian Bible. While declining, the religious book section still accounted for more than $416 million worth of sales in 2017. The last and smallest market of books is the nonprofit University Press, which publishes scholarly works in specialized areas. Both Duke and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill have their own presses for works such as Palestine is throwing a party and the whole world is invited, Capitol and State Building in the West Bank, and Cool Town, How Athens, Georgia launched alternative music and changed American culture. Wake Forest University, meanwhile, is the premier publisher of Irish poetry in North America, with more than 100 of such offerings in their catalog. More than $26 billion worth of books were sold in 2017, with 60% of them falling into the trade book category that includes adult and juvenile fiction and nonfiction, mass market paperbacks, ebooks, audiobooks, and religious books. Higher education textbooks was the next largest category, commanding a 15% share of total book sales with its $3.98 million price tag. Textbooks for pre-K through 12th grade education had the third largest slice of the pie, with $3.62 billion in sales. Professional and university press books totaled about 10% of all sales. Books are now in the convergence stage, where older media are reconfigured into newer digital media. Three primary examples of this are ebooks, self-publishing, and audiobooks. Electronic, or ebooks, are digital versions that can be read on a computer, cell phone, or e-reader. While RCA and Sony offered e-readers in the early 1990s, it was Amazon's introduction of the Kindle in 2007 that marked a turning point in the ebook industry. Despite a slowdown in the mid-2010s, ebooks still account for 15% of book sales. And of course, ebooks are significantly cheaper to produce, as there's no printing, storage, or shipping fees involved. Digital publishing has also increased self-publishing, previously considered low culture, amateur authors not good enough to find a traditional publisher. Self-publishers are saving both a 10% literary agent fee and making between 35% and 70% of an ebook purchase price from Amazon, compared to the 5 to 15% royalties of paper-based book authors. The fastest growing section of the publishing industry is the audiobook, with sales more than doubling from 2013 to 2017. And it's no wonder, because like the sign says, audiobooks make it easier to read a book while listening while on the bus, doing chores, at the gym, relaxing at the beach. I personally enjoy audiobooks anytime I have to drive more than an hour. And of course, audiobooks are popular with the visually impaired and people who have difficulty reading, like those with dyslexia. And in case you were worried that ebooks and audiobooks would spell the end of the library, they're actually contributing to their growth. A report from Statista showed that the number of digital books borrowed from U.S. libraries and schools was 326 million in 2019, up 20% from the previous year. 211 million ebooks were borrowed, surpassing the 200 million mark for the first time, while 114 million audiobook titles were checked out. Another form of media convergence is the link between books and television and film. Not only can TV and film help sell books, but books serve as ideas for TV shows and movies. When books are adapted for the big or small screen, it can also increase their sales. And fans of a book are ready-made fans of a TV series or movie based on it. Here are just some of the many books adapted for TV and film in recent years.